A raging bull smashed through the barn in a fury, but stopped cold the moment it heard the old man's voice. "What happens next will leave you speechless." The sound came first, deep, rhythmic, and growing louder with each second. It was not the light gallop of a horse, nor the quick pounding of a man's boots on dirt. This was heavier, sharper, like the steady drum of something massive tearing toward its mark. Then came the shouts, scattered and desperate, voices breaking with urgency. "Clear the path! Move out of the way!" The warnings bounced off the hills of Redmore Valley, carried by the wind and met with startled cries from the few farmhands still out in the open. Henry Dallard emerged from the shadows of his barn, his gloved hands still holding the hammer he'd been using to drive in a stubborn fence post. His boots crunched against the gravel as he stepped toward the source of the noise, the late sun painting his lean frame in gold and shadow. And then he saw it. Iron Fang. The bull was a mountain of muscle and fury, its black coat slick with sweat, nostrils flaring with every explosive breath. Its head was lowered, horns gleaming like twin blades, and each stride seemed to shake the earth beneath it. Bits of dirt and grass flew up from under its hooves as it tore across the open field, closing the distance in seconds. Behind it, Victor Holt fought to keep his horse steady, his face pale under the brim of his hat as he wrestled the reins. "Henry, get inside, now!" Victor's voice cracked, but the warning barely seemed to touch the air before it was swallowed by the roar of the bull's charge. Henry didn't move, his eyes locked on the creature, watching as it barreled toward the barn. The massive doors rattled in their hinges from the force of the hooves hitting the ground. Then, with a crash that split the air, Iron Fang slammed into the barn's side. Timber groaned and splintered, boards snapping like dry kindling. Shards of wood exploded outward, skittering across the dirt. Farmhands scattered in all directions, shouts overlapping in a rising storm of panic. One man tripped in his haste, scrambling to his feet as the bull swung its head, snorting, ready to drive forward again. The barn trembled under the force, the air thick with the smell of churned earth and dust. And still, Henry stood in place. He let the hammer fall from his hand, the metal striking the dirt with a dull thud. He took a single step forward, his shoulders squared, the lines in his face hardening. His voice, when it came, was low but carried across the space between them with uncanny weight. "Easy, boy. Easy." The effect was immediate, startling in its clarity. Iron Fang's forward motion slowed, his massive head lifting slightly as his dark eyes fixed on Henry. The bull's chest rose and fell, each breath deep and tense. A muscle in its flank twitched, its hooves pawing the ground but not advancing. Dust swirled between them, caught in the dying light, as the moment stretched thin. Victor's horse sidestepped nervously, nostrils flaring, but Victor himself stared, unable to hide his confusion. "Henry, what are you doing? That thing will kill you." His voice was strained, but Henry didn't break eye contact with the animal. He took another measured step forward, his boots silent over the churned soil. "Not today," Henry murmured, though his words were more to the bull than to Victor. He could see the tremor in Iron Fang's frame, not the quiver of fear, but the uncertainty of recognition. It was in the way the bull's ears tilted forward, the subtle shift of its weight. Henry knew that look. He had seen it years ago, in another place, under entirely different circumstances. Iron Fang's breaths came shorter now, his muscles tight but held in check. His snort sent a hot cloud of steam into the air between them, the sound raw and edged with memory. Henry's eyes softened, but his stance stayed firm. The barn behind him was a ruin in the making, but none of that mattered, not in this second. Victor glanced between man and beast, his brow furrowing as if trying to decipher an unspoken exchange. "Henry, how are you?" He stopped himself, shaking his head as though unwilling to waste breath on the question. Henry didn't answer. His mind was already drifting back to a time when Iron Fang wasn't Iron Fang at all. Back then, he was smaller, weaker, a calf barely clinging to life in a flooded gully after a sudden spring storm. Henry had waded in, the water biting cold against his legs, pulling the shivering creature free. He had dried him, fed him, and in the quiet weeks that followed, given him a name, Rook. That memory flickered in Henry's eyes now, though he knew no one else could see it. No one in Redmore Valley knew the truth, not even Victor. They only saw an old man standing in front of a furious animal, gambling with his life in a way that seemed reckless, even foolish. But Henry knew better. The bull shifted, taking one step closer. A low rumble rolled from its chest, the sound neither a growl nor a purr, but something in between. The farmhands, huddled at a distance, watched with wide eyes, unsure whether to run or stay. The moment held, a fragile thread between chaos and calm. Henry's voice came again, steady and deliberate, rolling like slow thunder. "You remember, don't you, boy?" Iron Fang's ears flicked. His breath slowed. And though his muscles stayed taut, his stance had changed. not the coiled readiness to charge, but the guarded posture of something that wasn't sure if it should. Dust settled slowly over the wrecked side of the barn, catching the last slanting rays of sunlight. The air was still thick with the scent of fear and wood dust, but somewhere in that mix was a faint shift, an unspoken recognition passing between man and beast. Henry didn't smile, didn't relax. He knew the moment could break at any second, but in that instant, in the narrowing space between them, it was not rage that filled Ironfang's eyes. It was something else entirely. What no one knew was that Henry had met this bull before, years ago, under circumstances that neither Victor nor anyone else in the valley was aware of. And though the animal's fury seemed unstoppable, Henry's voice carried something that pierced through it, a connection rooted in a secret past encounter. Victor's boots pounded against the dirt as he leapt from his saddle, shouting for the others to form a line, to drive Ironfang toward the far pasture. Two men rushed to grab rope and poles, but their frantic movements only stirred the bull's restless energy. The animal's muscles quivered beneath its black hide, its head sweeping from side to side, hooves stamping deep impressions into the churned soil. The smell of dust and sweat hung thick in the air, every sound sharp in the tense silence that followed each breath. Henry stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his weight evenly balanced. Splintered planks shifted beneath his boots as he crossed the jagged wreckage of his barn wall. The crunch of wood underfoot seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. He knew every eye was on him, even Ironfang's. The bull's gaze didn't waver. Its dark eyes locked onto Henry's face, searching, calculating. Henry's voice came low, carrying through the air with the weight of something remembered. Rook. The name was soft, almost tender, yet it cut through the charged air like the clean snap of a whip. The bull's ears twitched. Its head dipped, then rose again, as if sifting through the sound for meaning. Its breath, which had been loud and ragged, steadied fractionally. The massive chest still rose and fell with power, but the movement slowed, the frenzy in its body coiling inward rather than bursting outward. Victor's voice rang out behind him, urgent and strained. "Henry, for heaven's sake, step back! That thing's not playing games!" His words were sharp, but Henry didn't turn. He didn't blink. Ironfang swayed on its hooves, the rhythm of its movements strangely measured now. The animal's tail flicked once, dust curling in the air around it. Henry took another step, the boards beneath him creaking but holding. The bull's nostrils flared, pulling in the familiar scent of the man before it. Henry remembered the night like it was yesterday. The cold, the sound of rushing water, and the trembling form of a calf trapped chest-deep in the flooded gully. Its legs had been tangled in reeds, its eyes wide with the kind of fear that spoke to survival's edge. He had hauled the young animal out, his arms burning, his boots sinking deep into the muck. He had fed it, warmed it, and given it a name, Rook. And when the land turned dry and the feed grew scarce, he had sold it to keep his farm from folding. The crowd didn't know that story. Victor didn't know. But the bull seemed to remember some part of it. The space between them felt thinner now, as if the years had collapsed into a single point. Then Henry saw it, a flicker of movement at the far corner of his property. Two men, dressed in plain work clothes but with a stiffness in their gait that didn't belong to farmers, were slipping along the fence line. Both carried rifles, long and slender, the kind used for darts rather than bullets. Their bodies moved in calculated rhythm, no wasted steps. Henry's jaw tightened. Those weren't Victor's men. He could tell by the way they kept glancing at each other instead of the bull, the way their hands stayed poised over their triggers. He kept his eyes forward, pretending not to notice, but every part of him was tracking their approach. Victor caught sight of them a moment later. "Who are those fellas?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But his question got swallowed in the commotion of his own men shouting and waving poles, trying to hold the bull's attention away from the intruders. Henry's voice deepened, calm but edged with quiet urgency. "Rook, stay." He didn't know if the animal understood the word, but the tone seemed to hold it there, like a tether invisible to anyone but them. The men in the distance closed in, keeping low, their boots barely disturbing the dry grass. The sun was dipping toward the horizon, stretching the shadows of the fence line across the dirt like black spears. Henry noted how deliberate they were, how their approach didn't match the chaos of an animal escape. This wasn't chance. This was an operation. Ironfang's head shifted slightly, his eyes cutting toward the far field where the movement was. His body tensed, one hoof grinding into the dirt, but he didn't break from Henry's stare. That was when Henry knew. These men were the real threat. The thought settled cold in his chest. The bull's escape might not have been an accident. The intruder's path led directly toward the barn's open flank, the spot where Henry stood. They weren't here to help Victor, and they weren't here for the animal's safety. Victor shouted again, "Henry, back off, now!" The panic in his voice was real, but Henry ignored it. His focus was locked on the tightening triangle between himself, the bull, and the approaching men. Every second that passed pulled them closer, every step deliberate. Henry spoke the name again, Rook, but this time his voice carried a note of command. Iron Fang's breathing steadied further, his chest rising in rhythm with Henry's own. The old man's body was still, but his mind was a storm. He could feel the weight of something larger pressing in, a design behind all this chaos. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of the rifle's barrels. Henry could see the way the men's hands tightened around their grips, their fingers hovering just shy of the triggers. They weren't aiming for the bull's head or chest, they were lining their shots with care. And the angle was wrong. It wasn't Iron Fang they were sighting in on. The truth landed sharp in Henry's gut. They were aiming at him. A surge of protective instinct rose in him, tangled with the memories of the small calf he had once shielded from the elements. Whatever these men wanted, they weren't going to get it without stepping through the space Iron Fang now guarded. The bull's tail lashed once more, and its stance shifted subtly toward the intruders. Henry caught the motion, and without moving his eyes from the animal, gave a barely perceptible nod. Iron Fang's ears flicked at the gesture, the muscles in his shoulders bunching in quiet readiness. The evening air thickened, the last of the sunlight cutting sharp lines across the field. In the quiet before the next move, Henry felt the certainty settle deep and immovable. The animal's escape had been no accident at all. The bull's nostrils flared, each breath sounding like steam forced through a narrow pipe. Its gaze snapped past Henry toward the two men closing in, rifles steady, eyes unblinking. That was when Henry saw it clearly. Those weapons weren't aimed at Iron Fang at all. They were aimed at him. His stomach clenched, and the pieces locked into place in an instant. This wasn't about a rampaging bull or property damage. It was a setup. The breakout, the smashed barn, the chaos. It had all been staged to pull him into the open. The men's movements were too precise for farmhands. Their steps were controlled, shoulders squared even in the uneven ground. The plain clothes couldn't hide the discipline in their posture. Henry recognized the type, hired men, the kind who didn't ask questions. Then the name surfaced in his mind, cold and unwelcome. Vornex Agricorp. For years, that shadowed agricultural company had been circling Redmore Valley, quietly buying farms one by one. Those who refused their offers were met with mysterious accidents, livestock vanishing, fences cut in the night. Henry had been one of the few to stand firm. Now, he realized, they'd decided to make him bend another way. Iron Fang's body stiffened as the intruders advanced. The bull's eyes burned with a predator's focus, the deep rumble in its throat warning of the violence it was about to unleash. Without warning, the massive animal wheeled away from Henry and launched forward, every muscle exploding into motion. The ground trembled as the bull charged, hooves pounding like war drums. Dust exploded around its legs, the air filling with the raw sound of power and motion. The two riflemen reacted too slowly. One stumbled back, falling hard in the dirt, his weapon skidding away. The other spun sideways, barely avoiding the first sweep of Iron Fang's horns. The force of the bull's momentum carried them apart like dry leaves in a hard wind. But they weren't amateurs for long. The one still standing regained his footing, lifting his rifle in a fluid, practiced motion. Henry saw the glint of a dart just before it hissed through the air. The dart struck Iron Fang high on the flank. The bull bellowed in rage, twisting violently, muscles jerking beneath its hide. Its back legs buckled for an instant, but it didn't go down. Henry's breath caught. A dart like that was meant to bring down a full-grown steer in seconds. The fact that Iron Fang stayed standing meant the drug hadn't fully taken hold yet, but it was only a matter of time. He had no choice. His eyes darted to the barn wall, where the rusted cattle prod still hung from a bent nail. In 3 strides he had it in hand, its weight familiar, the rubber grip worn smooth by years of use. "Henry!" Victor's voice rang out, closer now, the thud of his boots pounding across the dirt. His face was flushed with alarm, sweat streaking through the dust on his brow. "What are you doing?" Henry didn't look back. "Keeping him on his feet," he said, and plunged forward. The scene was chaos. Victor's men shouting, the 2 riflemen splitting apart to circle Iron Fang, the bull swinging its head to keep them both in sight. Henry slid along the outer arc of the fight, eyes fixed on the man with the dart rifle. With the prod's metal tip ready, he lunged, jabbing hard into the attacker's thigh. A sharp crack sounded as the electric charge discharged. The man cried out and dropped to one knee, his weapon clattering away. Iron Fang seized the opening. With a roar that vibrated in Henry's chest, the bull slammed into the man, sending him sprawling across the dirt. "Watch out!" Victor shouted, his own lasso whipping through the air. It landed clean around the second rifleman's arms, yanking him off balance. The man hit the ground hard, the rifle knocked from his grip. For a heartbeat, it looked like they had turned the tide. Then the sound came, Boots on gravel, more of them. Henry turned to see 3 more figures emerging from beyond the fence, each carrying heavier weapons. These weren't dart rifles. The dark metal barrels gleamed dully in the fading light, the kind of weapons built for fast, brutal work. Victor's expression hardened. "This is no rescue," he muttered, more to himself than to Henry. But Henry heard him, and the truth of it landed heavy. The second wave moved quickly, fanning out to flank both sides of the barn. Henry's pulse hammered in his ears. Every muscle in his body was taut, waiting for the moment they'd all strike at once. Iron Fang seemed to sense it too, his movements sharper now, the drug's effect slowing him, but not yet enough to end the fight. Dust swirled around them, the air choked with the smell of sweat, soil, and animal musk. Shouts overlapped, Victor calling commands, the intruders barking short orders to one another. Henry stayed near Iron Fang's shoulder, his voice steady, calling the bull's old name again and again. "Rook! Rook! Hold!" Each time Iron Fang's stance faltered, Henry's voice pulled it back, grounding the animal in that strange tether between them. Twice, the bull lowered its head at just the right moment, deflecting an incoming strike from one of the newcomers. Then one of the heavier rifles fired, not a dart, but a beanbag round meant to stun at close range. It slammed into Iron Fang's ribs with a deep thud. The bull staggered sideways, air rushing from its lungs in a violent snort. Henry planted himself in front of the animal, prod raised, daring anyone to come closer. Victor was there too, rope ready, intercepting another man who tried to slip around to Henry's blind side. They moved almost in sync now, the shared rhythm of men fighting for the same ground. The chaos stretched on, boots pounding, the snap of rope, the dull clang of weapons against bone or wood. Iron Fang's bellow became the heartbeat of the fight, echoing off the barn's remains. The bull refused to go down. Every time its legs trembled, Henry called, and it surged forward again, scattering the intruders. But Henry's mind never left the larger truth. This wasn't just about one fight in the dust. Vornex Agricorp had made their move openly now, and they wouldn't accept defeat quietly. The thought was a cold certainty in his gut. The dust settled for a moment, giving him a glimpse of the surviving attackers pulling back toward the fence line, weapons still in hand, but their formation broken. The first wave had been scattered, the second forced to retreat, but not destroyed. They were regrouping. This was only the opening round. Iron Fang stood beside him, sides heaving, the dart still buried in its flank. Henry's grip on the cattle prod didn't loosen. He knew this was far from over. He knew something bigger was coming. In the back of Henry's mind, he knew that once the immediate danger was over, something even bigger would be coming. The company would not take this loss quietly. By dusk, the barn was no longer a building but a skeleton of what it had been. Splintered beams leaning at odd angles, the roof collapsed into a pile of shattered wood and twisted nails. Smoke-like dust still drifted in the cooling air, carrying the acrid scent of broken earth and disturbed hay. Henry stood in the wreckage, chest rising and falling steadily, though each breath was heavier than the last. Beyond the debris, the last hum of engines had faded into the distance. The intruders were gone. All that remained of them were scattered pieces of gear, dropped rifles, torn gloves, and a trail of deep tire tracks pressed into the soft ground leading toward the main road. Victor was bent over, hands on his knees, drawing long breaths. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his face was a mask of exhaustion and disbelief. He straightened slowly, glancing toward Henry. There was gratitude in his eyes, but also a kind of stunned respect, as if he had just witnessed something that defied what he thought he knew. "I didn't think we'd see the end of them tonight," Victor said, voice low but steady. Henry didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on Iron Fang, Rook, who stood just beyond the ruins. The bull's head was lowered, not in defeat but in weariness, sides heaving with the effort of each breath. The tranquilizer dart still jutted from its flank, its red-feathered tail swaying gently in the breeze. Henry approached, boots crunching on the splintered boards beneath his feet. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice the same calm tone he had used in the fight. He reached up, placed a hand on the bull's warm hide, and worked the dart free in one smooth motion. His fingers were steady despite the day's chaos, though the weight of what had just happened pressed on him heavily. The metal tip of the dart glinted in the fading light before he tossed it aside into the dirt. The sound of footsteps drew his attention. From the far edge of the property, figures began appearing, men from neighboring farms, drawn by the noise of the fight. There was Caleb from the west pasture, tall and lean, his hat pushed back on his head. Beside him came the Burrows brothers, mud still on their boots from their own evening chores. One by one they stopped at the edge of the scene, eyes wide as they took in the wreckage, the scattered weapons, and the massive bull standing calm at Henry's side. "What happened here?" Caleb asked, his voice carrying the disbelief of someone who already knew the answer, but needed to hear it aloud. Victor stepped forward, giving them the account. He told of the breakout, the armed men, and how Rook, Ironfang, had stopped in his tracks at the sound of Henry's voice, then turned his fury against the intruders. The other farmers listened in silence, their faces shifting from shock to something harder, a shared understanding of what this meant. By the time the telling was done, word was already moving faster than the night. One of the Burroughs brothers was on his radio, relaying the events to others farther out. Henry could picture the story spreading through kitchens and back porches, down dusty roads and across fences, the tale of the bull that fought alongside a man against hired guns. The next morning, the local news crews came. They were careful not to step too far into the debris, cameras lingering on the ruined barn and the massive animal grazing calmly nearby. Reporters spoke in practiced tones, but their eyes kept drifting toward Henry with unspoken questions. He answered what he had to, keeping his voice even, avoiding details that would only invite trouble too soon. For all the sudden attention, Henry's thoughts stayed elsewhere. The fight might have been over, but it was only a round in a longer battle. He had seen the kind of men Vornek sent, and the way they had moved told him they weren't the worst the company could deploy. Next time, they wouldn't just send a handful of hired muscle. They'd come prepared, and they'd come to finish what they had started. That night, Henry began making changes. The wreckage of the barn was cleared not just to rebuild, but to reshape the property's defenses. He worked with Victor to erect stronger fencing, reinforced with steel posts sunk deep into the ground. Watch posts went up at the corners of the land, each manned by a trusted neighbor on a rotating schedule. Paths to the main road were narrowed and blocked where possible, forcing any incoming vehicles into choke points where they could be stopped. Ironfang stayed close, as if sensing the weight of what was to come. The bull moved with less restlessness than before, often standing near the barn site while Henry worked. Some nights, when the air was still and the valley was quiet, Henry would catch the animal watching him with the same steady gaze it had held in the middle of the fight. "Whatever they bring next," Victor said one evening, handing Henry a coil of fresh rope, "we'll be ready." His voice carried the conviction of a man who had decided he would stand and face whatever came, no matter the cost. Henry gave a small nod. "We'll have to be." Days passed in a strange rhythm, part repair, part preparation. The land began to look different, less like a quiet farm, and more like a stronghold disguised as one. Every improvement felt like stacking another stone against a rising tide, but Henry knew tides had a way of finding cracks. One afternoon, as he and Victor walked the perimeter, Victor stopped to look out over the valley. The sun was dipping low, painting the grass in gold. "They'll come back," Victor said quietly. Henry's eyes stayed on the horizon. "I know." He didn't need to explain further. The calm they lived in now was only a pause, a deceptive stillness before another storm. That knowledge didn't make him anxious. It made him deliberate. Every moment they had was another chance to prepare. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Henry held to a truth that gave him more strength than any wall or weapon could: the bond between a man and the creature that remembered his voice. The calm after the storm was deceptive, but Henry welcomed it, using every moment to plan. And though the company would come back with more force, Henry had something they could never manufacture: the bond between a man and the creature that remembered his voice. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of empathy, unexpected connections, and the power of a quiet presence in the midst of chaos. This narrative aims to highlight that understanding and trust can be found in the most unlikely of places, reminding us to look beyond the surface.